Welcome to Saving Castles, the podcast for castle and chateau enthusiasts. Join us as we explore the fascinating history, stories, and culture of these awe-inspiring structures, from the legends and folklore to the latest in restoration. We'll cover it all, so whether you're a seasoned castle aficionado or just discovering the magic of these magnificent buildings, this is the podcast for you. So grab your headphones and let's dive in.
Imposing, fortified, and resplendent with grandeur, medieval castles loom large, not just on our landscape, but also in our collective consciousness. To most, they evoke a sense of awe and a vision of gallant knights, beautiful princesses, and regal feasts. However, these fortresses of stone are also silent witnesses to some of the darkest chapters of history. Today, we draw back the velvet curtain of the Middle Ages to reveal the sombre side of castle life, a world steeped in the harsh realities of feudal society. Medieval castles were not just royal residences or fairy tale settings, but bastions of authority and judgment. Within these high stone walls, sentences were pronounced, and harsh punishments meted out, leaving indelible marks on the annals of time. To understand the role of the castle in this respect, we need first to delve into the legal system of the medieval period, a world away from the laws and rights we take for granted today. Back then, the king was the ultimate judge, and his word was law. Yet in a time where travel was arduous and communication slow, he delegated his legal authority to his lords, who in turn appointed sheriffs and constables. These were men of power, known to every commoner in their jurisdiction and feared by them. The castle was their seat of power, a tangible symbol of their authority. From the imposing battlements to the grand great hall, the castle's every feature was designed to impress and intimidate. But it was the dungeon and the torture chambers that provoked the deepest dread. These dark spaces beneath the castle were places of despair, where the rule of law meted out its harshest punishments. The very word dungeon conjures up images of dank, lightless cells, of misery and despair. In essence, it was a deep, dark pit, often a castle's lowest and most secure point. Dungeons were reserved for those deemed the worst offenders against societal norms, or for high-profile captives awaiting trial, torture, or execution. The threat of ending up in the dungeon was enough to keep many a medieval denizen in line. Moreover, castles often had torture chambers, places filled with ghastly devices designed to break the human spirit and body alike. Whispers of these tools of torment, which we shall explore in later segments, served as a grim reminder to those who dared to defy the Lord's rule. As we delve deeper into the medieval world of crime and punishment, it's worth noting that what may seem unimaginably harsh and brutal to our modern sensibilities was a reflection of societal norms and values of the time. The Middle Ages, after all, was an era marked by stark divides between rich and poor, noble and commoner, free and unfree. Thus, the very architecture of the castle, its soaring towers and looming walls, embodied a world where power and fear were intimately entwined. This was a world where heads could roll and dungeons filled with the condemned, a world where justice was as much about maintaining control as it was about dealing with crime. So, as we step further into this uncharted realm of medieval punishments, let us not forget the castle's role in it all. Behind its majestic facade, it was an ominous place of judgment, a fortress of authority that maintained order through fear and punishment. It's a chilling testament to the length society will go to preserve the status quo. But, as we'll soon discover, this peculiar world of medieval punishments was about more than just maintaining control. It was a mirror to the values, beliefs, and fears of a society long gone. Let us traverse back into the world of the Middle Ages, a time defined by a moral code we can scarcely understand today. This was a world where religion held sway, societal hierarchy was rigid, and the very concepts of crime and punishment were inextricably bound to notions of sin, penance, and salvation. Medieval society was built upon a foundation of faith. The Church dictated the moral fabric of society, casting sins as crimes and offering harsh penances as deterrents. Therefore, it is vital to remember that when we speak of crimes in the medieval context, we're not merely addressing violations of human laws, but transgressions against divine order. The scale and scope of medieval crimes were broad, encompassing both the mundane and the profound. At one end, there were crimes such as theft, typically committed by the peasantry, driven by poverty or desperation. These crimes were viewed severely, not just as an act against an individual, but a rebellion against the societal order. Then there were higher crimes such as treason, a sin against the crown itself, perceived as an affront to divine order, given that the king's authority was considered God-given. Similarly, blasphemy or heresy was seen as an affront to God, warranting severe repercussion. In a world where divine and earthly laws were seen as one and the same, such crimes were an abomination, shaking the very foundations of society. One peculiar crime of the era was witchcraft, an accusation often levelled against women who failed to conform to societal norms or those who incited fear or suspicion. Witches were seen as pawns of the devil, their supposed powers a direct challenge to the Church's authority. Witchcraft was thus not merely a crime, but a symbol of the society's deep-seated fears and prejudices. The gravity with which these crimes were viewed is vital to understanding the severity of the punishments that followed. Theft could result in mutilation or branding, leaving the perpetrator physically marked for life, a walking embodiment of their crime. Treason or blasphemy could lead to the gruesome spectacle of a public execution, designed to instill fear and obedience among the populace. Witchcraft, often seen as the gravest sin of all, could lead to the horrifying fate of being burned at the stake. But it wasn't just the act of punishment itself that was significant. The manner of its execution was equally critical. Punishments were public, performed before an audience that was part spectator, part participant. They were a societal ritual, a spectacle meant to deter potential wrongdoers by demonstrating the severe consequences of breaking the law. Crucially, medieval punishments were not just about the infliction of physical pain. They were designed to induce a deep sense of shame and humiliation, targeting not just the body, but the soul. In the medieval world, disgrace was a potent weapon. Publicly marking someone as a sinner or a criminal could be more devastating than any physical torture. It was a spiritual stain that tainted not just the individual, but their entire lineage, a mark of Cain etched deeply into their identity. In this world where divine and earthly justice blurred into one crime and punishment were tools wielded to uphold societal order and religious orthodoxy. The looming walls of the castle, the dread of the dungeon, the spectacle of the public execution, these were the tangible manifestations of this reality. This intricate tapestry of crime, punishment, religion, and societal norms underpins the understanding of the medieval moral code. The harsh penalties of the era were as much a reflection of societal values as they were of the nature of the crimes themselves. They reveal a world that was fundamentally different from our own, where fear and respect for divine and earthly authority shaped every aspect of life. Let us turn our gaze to a hallmark of castle lore, the dungeon. If the castle's high towers and sturdy walls were the physical embodiments of the lord's authority, the dungeon represented the tangible dread of falling afoul of that authority. The mere mention of the word was enough to send shivers down the spines of medieval folk, for the dungeon was not just a place of confinement, but a realm of desolation and despair. Yet imprisonment in the medieval era was markedly different from our contemporary understanding of the term. Today, we think of prison as a place for long-term punishment, a place to serve a sentence. But in the medieval world, the dungeon was more akin to a holding place, a place where people were confined before they were brought to trial or executed. The conditions were dire, to say the least. Dank, poorly lit, and often without any form of sanitation, the dungeon was designed to break the spirit. The prisoners were shackled, their movements restricted, their freedom stripped away. Cold, hunger, and disease were constant companions. The silent echo of their despair resonated against the cold stone walls, painting a chilling tableau of the human will against torment. Some infamous castle dungeons have been etched into our collective memory. Take the Tower of London, for instance, a place synonymous with treachery, torture, and death. Its most notorious holding cell, the Beauchamp Tower, once held George Plantagenet, Duke of Clarence, brother to Edward IV and Richard III. The legend of his demise by being drowned in a vat of Malmsey wine speaks volumes about the gruesome allure of dungeon tales. Another aspect of medieval imprisonment that bears mentioning is the practice of ransom and hostage-taking. Nobles and knights captured during warfare were frequently kept in castle dungeons, not for punishment, but for political leverage. The dungeon was a negotiation table where power, politics, and coin converged. Richard the Lionheart, King of England, famously spent over a year in an Austrian dungeon before his subjects could amass an astronomical ransom for his release. But not all prisoners of the medieval dungeons were of high birth or caught in the crossfire of war. Some were victims of the penal system, waiting in dread for their impending trial or execution. The dungeon was their purgatory, a place where the passage of time blurred into an agonizing eternity. Confinement, especially in the solitary darkness of the dungeon, was a psychological torture in itself. Medieval society was, by and large, a communal one. Solitary confinement, the isolation from society and sensory deprivation, was antithetical to the psyche of the time. It was not merely about the deprivation of freedom, but the disconnection from the world, from the very essence of life itself. Yet, despite its horrors, the dungeon was more than just a cell of despair. It was a cog in the wheel of the medieval justice system, a symbol of the dire consequences of defiance. It was an embodiment of societal norms and values, a reflection of a society where maintaining order was paramount. Let us remember the dungeon, the silent monolith beneath the castle's grandeur, amid the gaiety of feasts and the clanging of nightly duels. Its presence was a stern reminder of the price of transgression. Like a spectre, it haunted the imagination of the medieval world, an eternal symbol of the dread of punishment, the fear of the iron grip of justice closing in. Emerging from the eerie silence of the dungeon, we arrive in the bustling medieval market square, a cacophony of traders haggling, minstrels playing, children laughing. Yet, amidst this lively panorama, one feature stands stark and sombre, the pillory. This simple wooden contraption is more than a tool of punishment. It is a theatre of public humiliation, a stage on which the medieval moral drama unfolds. The use of public humiliation as a form of punishment was widespread in the Middle Ages. The pillory, the stocks, and the whipping post were common sights in marketplaces and crossroads. Offenders were placed in these devices, their wrongdoing announced to the gathered crowd and left to face the scorn of their community. This punishment, though devoid of the physical brutality of the torture chamber, held a certain psychological terror. It struck at the heart of medieval social fabric, where honor and reputation were crucial. The humiliation was not merely a personal ordeal. It was a collective spectacle designed to deter potential wrongdoers by turning the offender into a pariah, an outcast shamed before society. Let us visualize a typical scene of such a punishment. The offender, say a baker guilty of selling underweight bread, is brought to the bustling marketplace. He is shackled in the pillory, his crime announced to the crowd. The spectators, once his friends and neighbours, now hurl insults and rotten produce at him. Children mock him, adults scorn him, and he is left to bear the weight of their collective disdain. The physical discomfort is palpable, yet it is the sting of public humiliation that hurts the most. Public shaming served multiple purposes in the Middle Ages. It was a practical measure, as it required minimal resources compared to imprisonment or execution, but its real power lay in its symbolic value. It provided a tangible public display of the consequences of breaking the societal code, reinforcing the moral order by making an example of the transgressor. Moreover, this spectacle of shame served as a powerful medium for the dissemination of societal norms and laws. Remember, this was an era when many were illiterate and laws were often not written down. Public punishments acted as dramatic demonstrations of the law, vivid morality plays that conveyed the gravity of different offences and the corresponding penalties. The theatre of public humiliation was not just about punishment, it was also about penance and, potentially, redemption. The very public nature of the punishment was meant to provoke remorse in the offender, compelling them to repent. This ties back to the deeply religious ethos of the medieval world, where the idea of penance was integral to the concept of justice. The shamed individual, through their ordeal, had a chance to make amends, to seek forgiveness from both society and God. The spectacle of public humiliation reveals the nuanced layers of the medieval moral code. On the surface, it may seem cruel and harsh, yet it was a form of punishment deeply rooted in the societal and religious ideals of the time. It was not just about enforcing law and order, but about maintaining the moral fabric of society, where every citizen had a part to play in the grand spectacle of justice. As we explore further into the peculiar world of medieval punishments, it's vital to remember that they were not stand-alone phenomena. They were deeply intertwined with the societal, cultural, and religious context of the era. The spectacle of public humiliation, with its chilling, dramatic flair, serves as a potent reminder of this complex interplay. From the spectacle of public humiliation, we now delve into the brutal physicality of medieval punishments. Mutilation, branding, and physical marking were prevalent in the Middle Ages, each serving as a stark embodiment of justice that left an indelible scar on the offender, both physically and metaphorically. Theft was a common crime in the medieval world, often driven by desperate poverty. Yet society viewed it severely, its punitive measures reflecting a sense of retributive justice. The law often demanded that the thief pay back multiple times the value of the stolen goods. If they could not, they faced the harsh reality of physical punishment. Branding was one such method, a punishment as visceral as it was symbolic. The offender would be branded on the face or hand with a hot iron, the mark signaling their crime to all who saw it. Imagine the sizzling sound, the acrid smell of burnt flesh, the searing pain, a chilling symphony of retribution echoing in the public square. Each wince, each whimper of pain was not just a testament to the thief's guilt, but a chilling cautionary tale for the onlookers. Similarly, gruesome was the practice of mutilation. Cutting off a hand or a finger was a common punishment for theft. This was not merely about inflicting pain, but about marking the criminal in a permanent way. The missing appendage was a lifelong reminder of their crime, a stigma that branded them an outcast, unable to fully participate in society. These punishments weren't just about retribution. They were deterrents. They were intended to discourage potential wrongdoers by demonstrating the severe consequences of theft. The dread of a branding iron's hiss or the chilling finality of a chopping block was meant to resonate louder than the lure of easy riches. Yet there was another layer to these harsh, punitive measures. In a society deeply influenced by religion, physical marking was seen as a manifestation of divine justice, a mirror of the spiritual stain left by sin. Medieval theology often emphasized the unity of body and soul, and physical marking became a tangible reflection of the soul's blemish. There's a chilling finality to these punishments, a brutal conclusiveness that's hard to comprehend today. They remind us of the vast gulf that separates our modern sensibilities from the medieval worldview. These practices, repugnant as they may seem to us, were steeped in a very different ethos, one where the harshness of punishment was a reflection of the seriousness with which society regarded the breach of its laws. The vivid imagery of branding and mutilation brings into sharp relief the medieval ethos of crime and punishment. It was a system steeped in the tenets of retributive justice, with a focus on public deterrence and a deep-seated belief in the symbolic power of physical punishment. Having beheld the brutal physicality of branding and mutilation, we now traverse into darker corners of medieval justice, the sinister world of judicial torture. The air grows tense, the dungeon walls seem to close in, and the horrifying clink of metal instruments echoes in your ears as we step into the room where medieval society sought to unearth truth through unimaginable pain. Today, torture is universally reviled and banned under international law. However, in the Middle Ages, judicial torture held a prominent position in the criminal justice system. It was seen as a legitimate and effective method for extracting confessions and information. Rooted in Roman law and later adopted by the Inquisition, it reflected a conviction that truth could be revealed under extreme duress. In the medieval mind, torture was not so much a punishment as it was a tool. It was used when evidence was scarce or when crimes were so severe that a confession was deemed essential to justice. The very act of confessing while under severe pain was seen as a divine sign of guilt. It was as if the agony had the power to banish deceit, forcing the truth to surface. The methods used in judicial torture were designed to inflict maximal pain without causing death. These included the rack, which stitched the victim's body to the point of dislocation, the strapido that lifted the accused by their arms tied behind their back, or the infamous thumb screws. The tormentors operated with a methodical precision, a chilling juxtaposition of careful calculation and brutal force. To the modern mind, the idea of inflicting such pain for the sake of truth is abhorrent. Yet we must remember that medieval society functioned under a vastly different paradigm. The church and state held immense power, and the value of individual rights and due process as we understand them today were not widely recognized. Moreover, the belief in the sanctity of truth and the fear of divine punishment for perjury was deeply ingrained. The medieval worldview held a firm belief in the impending reality of divine judgment. In this context, the excruciating pain of torture was seen as a pale echo of the eternal torment awaiting the unrepentant sinner in the afterlife. The cruel irony is that this belief, rooted in the pursuit of truth, often led to false confessions from those who could no longer bear the agony. Still, the practice was not without controversy, even within its historical context. Many ecclesiastical and secular authorities were uncomfortable with torture, leading to stringent regulations over when and how it could be used. Its application required authorization from high-ranking officials, and it was supposed to be a measure of last resort. Weaving our way through the grim annals of judicial torture, we witness the harsh extremities of medieval jurisprudence. The clanging of iron and the cries of the tortured form a harrowing soundtrack, echoing through the stone corridors of history. It is a chilling testament to a period when justice was sought in the midst of suffering, and truth was pursued in the shadow of fear. As our exploration deepens, the dungeon's darkness encroaches further. Yet, as grim as these realities may be, they illuminate the stark contrasts of the medieval world, its lofty chivalric ideals juxtaposed against a harsh justice system, mirroring the complex, multifaceted nature of the Middle Ages. It's a stark reminder of the human capacity for both light and darkness, a paradox etched deeply into the stones of the castles we so admire. Leaving the echoes of the torture chamber behind, we step into the harsh light of retributive justice. We delve into the concept of an eye for an eye, the principle known as lex talionis, and how it underpinned many medieval punishments. The crisp clang of the executioner's axe, the harsh crack of a whip, these are the sounds that fill the air as we explore the brutal calculus of medieval retribution. Lex talionis, Latin for Lord of Retaliation, posits that punishment should be equivalent to the harm inflicted by the crime. It's an ancient concept, echoed in the legal codes of Babylon, the Old Testament laws, and the early Germanic tribal customs, and found its way into the jurisprudence of the Middle Ages. The premise seems straightforward. The punishment should fit the crime. However, within the medieval context, this principle took on a stark, often brutal form. It was not merely symbolic or financial restitution, it often meant literal, physical retribution. Injury for injury, a tooth for a tooth, or a life for a life. This was the uncompromising scale of medieval justice. Consider the practice of weregild, a fine levied as compensation for personal injury or murder. The idea was to provide a non-violent alternative to blood feuds, establishing a set price for each type of injury. However, if the guilty party couldn't pay, they risked physical retribution equal to the harm they'd caused. In essence, this was lex talionis in action, highlighting its essential goal: to maintain equilibrium, to balance the societal scales upset by the crime. But how did this principle manifest in the medieval context? It was not simply about returning harm with harm. It reflected a view of justice deeply rooted in maintaining social order and balance. Retribution wasn't just a punitive measure. It was a way to restore the social equilibrium disrupted by the crime. However, the application of lex talionis often led to extreme punishments. For instance, regicide, or the murder of a king, was considered one of the gravest crimes, not merely for the act of killing, but for the immense social and political upheaval it caused. Hence, it was often punished with drawing and quartering, a gruesome procedure that involved dragging the accused behind a horse, hanging until near death, disembowelment, beheading, and finally division of the body into 4 parts. The sheer brutality of these punishments can be startling, yet they highlight the high stakes of maintaining social and political order in a society frequently teetering on the brink of chaos. They illustrate the medieval world's perception of crime and punishment, a harsh landscape where justice was a swift, unyielding force, balancing the scales with a grim finality. The principle of lex talionis is a testament to the complexity and paradoxes of the medieval world. It reflects an innate sense of justice, the desire for balance and order, yet simultaneously underscores the harshness and brutality of the era. It is a compelling lens through which to view the medieval system of justice, revealing the stark contrasts and tensions that define the age. As we continue our exploration, we bear witness to the dramatic interplay between crime and punishment, between harm and retribution. The clash of iron and the cries of the condemned echo in the chilly air, a chilling counterpoint to the lofty spires and stony grandeur of the castles we adore. We come upon a surprising bend in the road. Amid the spectre of gruesome punishments and harsh retribution, we find rays of mercy illuminating the dark corridors. These are the instances of royal clemency and ecclesiastical pardoning, elements that remind us that the medieval justice system wasn't solely about relentless retribution. In a world where justice was often swift and brutal, the granting of clemency was a beacon of hope for the condemned. Medieval kings often had the power to pardon or commute sentences, an authority they wielded with keen awareness of its significance. Whether used to display magnanimity, secure loyalty, or simply in response to appeals for mercy, the act of granting pardon was imbued with deep symbolic and practical power. The process wasn't arbitrary, however. It was tied to the medieval concept of kingship, where monarch was seen as the earthly embodiment of divine rule, dispensing justice and mercy in their realm. Pardoning was an act of royal grace, a display of the king's beneficence, mirroring divine mercy. It could serve to bolster the king's reputation, demonstrate their benevolence, and reinforce their authority. Yet the king was not the only source of mercy. The medieval church, too, held the power of pardon in its hands. As the spiritual caretaker of the realm, the church offered sanctuary to those fleeing justice and the power to absolve sinners of their sins. This spiritual clemency was a vital aspect of the church's mission, reflecting the Christian ethos of forgiveness and redemption. The church also played a critical role in shaping societal perceptions of crime and punishment, reinforcing the possibility of repentance and spiritual salvation. Penitential practices like pilgrimages or public acts of contrition were often prescribed as a means to atone for sins and transgressions, adding a spiritual dimension to the legal repercussions of crime. Pardoning and clemency, then, were more than mere acts of mercy. They were intricate threads woven into the tapestry of medieval justice, blending legal, spiritual, and political elements into a complex interplay of power and morality. It's tempting to view these acts of mercy as an anomaly in an otherwise brutal justice system, yet they are essential components of the medieval worldview. They underscore a deep-seated belief in the possibility of redemption, the transformative power of mercy, and the dual nature of royal and divine authority. As we navigate this twist in our narrative, we're reminded that even in the shadow of the headsman's axe, rays of mercy shone through. The clang of iron chains gives way to the tolling of church bells, the clamour of the crowd to whispered prayers for pardon. It's a stark reminder of the paradoxes of the medieval world, where justice and mercy, punishment and pardon were entwined in the intricate dance of power and morality. The image of the forgiving king or absolving priest stands in stark contrast to the executioner and torturer. Yet each is a facet of the same complex, multifaceted medieval reality. As we wander through the echoing halls of these ancient castles, we bear witness to the full spectrum of human experience, the darkest depths and the most luminous peaks, reflected in stone and iron, in law and mercy. We now turn our attention to the intricate web of societal hierarchies and their profound influence on the medieval justice system. Imagine, if you will, a lavish feast in the castle's grand hall, where nobles clad in velvet and silk mingle and toast with golden goblets. At the same time, in the cold stone courtyard below, peasants huddle in coarse woolen cloaks hearing meagre rations. These contrasting scenes embody the stark class disparities that pervaded the medieval world and seeped into the sphere of crime and punishment. Justice in the medieval period wasn't blind. It was often tinted by the colours of one's social standing. The punishment meted out for a crime could be starkly different depending on whether the perpetrator was a noble or a peasant, a cleric or a layman. This disparity was not merely a quirk of the system. It was deeply embedded in the fabric of medieval society, reflecting the entrenched hierarchies and privilege that characterized the era. Take, for example, the right of benefit of clergy, which allowed individuals who could prove their literacy, a skill primarily possessed by the clergy, to escape harsh secular punishments. This privilege often extended to the nobility, who typically had access to education. In contrast, the illiterate peasant found little mercy in the face of such legal provision. This wasn't simply a legal loophole. It underscored the medieval belief that clerics and their noble counterparts were inherently more valuable and thus deserving of leniency. Similarly, crimes committed by or against the nobility were treated differently from those involving commoners. A nobleman found guilty of a crime might face a hefty fine, while a peasant could be condemned to physical punishment for the same offence. Conversely, crimes against the nobility were deemed more severe, attracting stiffer penalties. These variations reveal the deeply ingrained social values of the medieval world, where one's birth determined not only their station in life, but also their treatment in the eyes of the law. This interplay of crime, punishment, and social status formed a complex tapestry that reflected the broader societal structure. The swift strike of the executioner's axe on a commoner's neck and the gentle chink of gold coins as a nobleman paid his fine were both part of the same symphony, a melody composed of privilege and power, hierarchy and justice. The grandeur of the castle's towering spires and the sombre shadow of the dungeon below mirror these disparities. Within their thick stone walls we find a microcosm of the medieval world, a place where power and privilege intertwined with law and order, shaping the ebb and flow of justice. As we approach the culmination of our exploration, the echoes of the past reverberate around us. They speak of a world where justice was not merely about right and wrong, innocence and guilt. It was a dance of power and privilege, a societal mirror reflecting the hierarchy, disparities, and complex realities of the medieval world. As we stand on the cusp of this journey through the stone-hewn halls of medieval justice, we find ourselves in the shadow of a long and complex history. We've witnessed the fear and awe of public executions, felt the cold iron of gains, listened to whispered prayers for mercy, and marvelled at the stark divides of privilege and plight. Yet, as we cast our gaze upon the sprawling landscape of the modern world, the echoes of the medieval era still reverberate, shaping our understanding of crime and punishment in unexpected ways. For all its stark brutality and complexity, the medieval justice system isn't merely a relic of a bygone era. Its traces can be found in many aspects of our contemporary justice system, from the concept of public accountability and the symbolic power of punishment to the influence of social hierarchies on justice. The public trials and executions of the Middle Ages, intended to deter potential offenders and reinforce societal norms, find their echoes in today's open courts and media coverage of high-profile cases. The symbolic significance of punishment, too, continues to shape our modern penal system, where prison sentences serve not only as a means of retribution, but also as a potent symbol of societal disapproval. The influence of societal hierarchies on the administration of justice remains a pressing concern. Although we've come a long way from the glaring disparities of the medieval era, the shadows of class, race, and socio-economic status continue to colour our justice system. They raise unsettling questions about equality, fairness, and the very concept of justice. The practice of pardoning, an integral aspect of medieval justice, survives in the powers vested in our contemporary heads of state. It continues to reflect the complexities of mercy and justice, the delicate balance between punishment and rehabilitation. Thus, the medieval justice system serves as a powerful lens through which we can view our own practices, challenging us to confront the enduring issues at the heart of justice, fairness, deterrence, retribution, and rehabilitation. It reminds us that the task of dispensing justice is a complex and delicate one, fraught with societal, moral, and human complexities. As we conclude our journey through the echoing corridors of these ancient castles, we're left with a deeper understanding of the historical continuum of justice. The stark realities of medieval punishments, their brutality, their spectacle, their inextricable links with social hierarchies, serve as a potent reminder of the journey we've undertaken as a society. They underscore the progress we've made, and yet they highlight the challenges that remain. The castle's towering spires, once silhouetted against the setting sun, recede into the twilight as we step back into the modern world. But we carry with us the echoes of our journey, the clang of the jailer's keys, the solemn tolling of the executioner's bell, the hushed whispers of mercy in the chapel. They remind us of the enduring quest for justice, the age-old struggle to balance the scales, and the constant evolution of our societal norms. In the peculiar world of medieval punishments, we find not just tales of dread and spectacle, but a mirror held up to our own world, reflecting the triumphs and tribulations of our ongoing journey towards a more just society. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Saving Castles podcast. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll continue to explore the fascinating world of castles and chateaus. Don't miss out and subscribe to our podcast to get notified when new episodes are released. For more information about us and our work, visit savingcastles.com. Thank you for listening.